Parsha is Parsha Va'eira, and I was listening to a shir from my Rosh Yeshiva, Yochanan Zweig Shlita. I was blown away by, most of us, we have a difficulty with something and we come up with a solution and that's it, we move on. It's like, okay, I have a question, what's the answer? Good, let's move on. The capacity to keep going back and revisiting something to see if I can get a better answer to it or, get more depth. You generally don't find people. We're lazy. We don't, as long as we feel, okay, that's a solution and it's the easiest solution, let's move on. But true growth comes from when we keep revisiting and we keep, can we say more? Is there better insights? That's one piece of it. The other thing is that to be completely reflective and seeing anything that's going on around us and using that to figure out, why am I being exposed to that? Why am I seeing that? Why is this happening now? And utilizing that for our own growth also is a very strong tool in terms of growing in our avodas Hashem, but in growing as individuals. And so it's something he discussed.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yes.
How do you decipher which, you could spend your whole life then just dwelling on something and keep going back to it, second guessing yourself, and then it prevents you from growing and moving on. So how do you know which
it has
to do that for and which not?
It has to be something that you're coming with the mindset that I want it to be a growth experience, not that you are just dwelling on something for the sake of feeling trapped about it. It has to be something that you're channeling it in a positive way. We'll talk about this in a moment because it's going to be pertinent. Just a couple of questions first, and then we'll talk about something which I think it's so timely. And I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. I'm just giving over an idea that I heard from my own yeshiva, where I consider to be the most brilliant insights into the human psyche. We have in the beginning of this week's Parsha that Hashem is reassuring Moshe. Moshe was questioning, look, I came, I made it worse for the Jews, and Hashem is reassuring him. And Hashem reflects back on his commitment to the Avos. Hashem commits back on his commitment to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that he would take Bnei Yisrael. He made a covenant. And in that covenant, he said that V'ivdu osam, they're going to be going down to a nation, the Egyptians. They're going to be working. They're going to be slaves. And it says Ve'inu osam. What does Ve'inu mean? And they'll be abused. Meaning there was known that they were going to endure not just, slavery, that's Ve'ivdu osam. There's also going to be Ve'inu. Inu is a little like torture or abuse. That's what the word, we're going to be subject to that as well. So Hashem reassures Moshe that, that covenant is strong and that I'm going to fulfill. And he uses, here we have the 4 Lashonos of Geula. That there's 4 expressions that Hashem tells Moshe that I'm going to stick to my covenant. And actually the 4 Lashonos of Geula, those 4 expressions of Geula, manifest itself on our Seder night through the 4 cups of wine. Right? The number 4 is prevalent in general, but it's the 4 Lashonos of Geula. That's really right. So what do we have here? It says Va'akimosi is brisi. Hashem says, I will establish my covenant with them, Laseis Lahem as Eretz Canaan, that they'll have Eretz Yisrael, the land that they lived in. And I've heard the groans of the Jewish people that have enslaved, and I've remembered my covenant. So go tell the Jewish people, Zani Hashem, v'hotzeisi eschem mitzachas sivlos Mitzrayim. I will take you out from the sivlos. The sivlos is more the sevel. Sevel is more than just the work. Sevel is more, You will be taken out from the two parts. There was the slavery and the abuse. Means that when you assuring them that the abuse is going to stop. You'll be taken out of the Sevel, what says Yeschem, you'll be taken out from the Sevel, Mitzrayim, V'yetzalti Yeschem me'avodasam, and you'll be saved from your work. So I guess it means that you're assuring someone, you're telling them the abuse is going to stop, and you're going to be coming out from the work, because the covenant is going to have work and abuse. You'll be right. So that's the two lashonas. First of all, Vatseisi v'hitzalti, you'll be taken out, and you will be saved. V'go'alti eschem, and you will be redeemed. Be'ezra netzuya shvatim gadol v'lakachti eschem li la'am. So you have the four lashonos over here. You have the four expressions that we drink the 4 cups of wine to. That v'lakachti, I will take you out, which is the focusing on the abuse. Then the stopping the slavery. Then I will redeem you, and I will take you for me to be a people. Okay, and each one of them is different level. But then at the end of everything, it says that, and after all of this, that you have gone through all of these 4 different levels of Geula, it says, then you will know, V'yedatem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem, that I am Hashem your God, Hamotzi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim, who takes you out from the abuse of Egypt. So 2 questions there, very strong questions. Number 1, the first thing he promises is going to take us out from the abuse, the Sivlos Mitzrayim. And then he's going to take us from the slavery, and we're going to go through the Red Sea, and we're going to come to Eretz Yisrael, and then you will know that I am the one that is taking you out, and it's in the present tense. Hamotzi eschem. That says Asher Hotzi Eschem, who took you out, who takes you out from the abuse. First of all, why are we going back to the abuse? All right, we're past that. He took us out from the abuse. He took us out of the slavery. You will know, and it's in the present, and you will continuously know that I am the one that is taking you out from the abuse. So why is it referencing back to the abuse, which was the first of the 4 lashonas Geula, the Hotseisi Mesivlos? And then why is it making it in the present tense? Right? Why is it present? Meaning that you will know that I was the one who took you out. Right? That's the first question. Second question we've spoken about in the past and we've given different answers to. I think this is there's Shivim Panim LaTorah. There's 70 ways to understand Torah and get different insights, but there's a Talmud Yerushalmi. Actually you have 2 Talmuds. There's a Talmud Yerushalmi. It was the original Talmud that was done when the Jews were living in Eretz Yisrael. It's called the Palestinian Talmud. It's the Talmud of Palestine, Talmud Yerushalmi. And then when they went into Babylonia, a few centuries later, it was all based on the Mishnah. The Mishnah we have redacted from Yehuda Anasi, but there was the Talmud that was put together, edited by Rabbi Yochanan in Eretz Yisrael, and then a generation or 2 later, it was re-edited, maybe actually in the 4th century. The one is in the 2nd century, the 4th century. It was edited by Ravina and Ravashi, compiled, and it's called Talmud Bavli, which the one we study today is the Talmud Bavli. There are people that still study Talmud Yerushalmi for insights, but the Talmud Yerushalmi says an interesting thing. There's a pasuk here about Tzaveh, that Hashem instructed Moshe and Aaron by Tzaveh el Bnei Yisrael, and he instructed them concerning the Jewish people. The pasuk doesn't say exactly what the instruction was. The Talmud Yerushalmi learns the fascinating thing is that he gave them the first mitzvah that applies to the entire nation. What's the first Mishnah? Is that there's a mitzvah for Jews to emancipate slaves. That you have to shiluch avadim. That you have to let slaves go free. So all the Rucham Shmulevitz, all of the commentaries deal with it. I said, that's the first. Why is that the first mitzvah that we're getting as Jews? Why is that the first mitzvah we're getting as Jews? That a Jew has to, we have 6 years, even if you have an Eved work for you, 6 years, on the 7th year you have to let him go. Right? That mitzvah would not necessarily be in play until we got into Eretz Yisrael, and we're there at least 14 years. We're talking about decades later that would be pertinent. That's the first mitzvah. So we've spoken about how empathy is so important, that when you can feel something, you know what it is to be a slave, that's the best time to internalize how to be able to do that mitzvah of letting free slaves. But I'm going to share with you a different understanding here. This is, I think, unbelievable, unbelievably important in terms of what's going on in today. The psychologists refer to something. So again, we're having three questions over here. Why is it that it says the four lashonos of Geula? First one is, I'll take you out from the abuse. And then after all four, it says, and then you will know that I am the one who takes you out from the abuse. In the present, and it's going back to Sivlos, to the first of the two, the Hotseisi. So, and the last question, why is it the first mitzvah we're given is this mitzvah of Shiluach Avadim? Out of all the mitzvahs, that's the one we've been giving as a nation. That's the Yerushalmi. Psychologists refer to something that's known as the cycle of abuse. Fascinating thing. What is a cycle of abuse? Is that, not always, but there is a strong percentage of incidences that people that themselves have been abused become abusers. Or let's put it the other way around, is that many, many times, very high percentage of times, people that are abusers themselves were abused. Talking about all forms of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, all types of abuse, you find that happens. And psychologists offer insights as to why should that be. If anything, the logic would dictate, right? I had a situation with my kid, my little kid, is 6 years old. So he's got my son has a daughter that's 5 years older than him. My son hasn't got I have a daughter that is 5 years older than my son. It's the gap between them. So they're very close, but he bothers her all the time. He to the point where sometimes I'm impressed with the restraint, because me, I would have zets but sometimes I come and she's crying. So I go over to him and I say, why is she crying? What did you do to her? So he says, this and this. I said, why did you do it? He says, well, she did it to me first. So my parenting kicks in. Well, she did it to you first, and you know how it feels. So then, why would you do it to her back? He says, well, then how's she supposed to know how it feels? He says to me, 6-year-old kid, that's it, parenting out the window. It's like, but logic would dictate that if something has been done to you and you understand what it's done to you, how do you turn around and do it to someone else? So, psychologists suggest the following, that a person who's been put into the most traumatic experiences loses the filter as to what's considered normal. That's one thing they say, is that, Rahman al-Islam, you hear about how people dealt with in the camps, like daily life, and it's like we can't even fathom. So somebody who has been subjected to the most traumatic experiences, the compass of what's normal shifts. And therefore, that's not considered to be, how do they become abuser? Because that's considered to be the norm. That's an answer that's given. So the truth of the matter is, okay, I hear that, but on the other hand, you can hear if somebody's abused as a kid, you don't have a compass of what's normal. But as you get older, you expect people to feel that, to be able to make calculated decisions of what's normal and what's not normal at that point, and recalibrate their compass as to what's considered normal, what's the, but But we don't see that happening. So I don't think that answers the question completely, that once a person is subjected to certain circumstances and therefore that changes what he considers normal, then he already acts. I don't have an answer completely, because that I understand, that a child is different than an adult, and they continue doing this as an adult when they were subjected as a child. Why should that? So I'll tell you the idea that I heard from Rosh Hashiva, and I think this is we have to see how to address it, but this is at least the starting point of understanding why it is, and why it is that abused people become abusers. And we can take it out to many levels. You find that also people that are bullied can often become bullies themselves. We see this as there's this cycle that occurs. So Rosh Hashiva wanted to suggest the following. People don't like feeling that they are victims. There are many times where people will pull the victim card, and then people will just refuse to move on with their lives and just keep pulling the victim card. We have that, right? But in general, a person doesn't want to feel like he's a victim. The easiest way for someone that has been abused to separate himself from being a victim is by becoming an abuser. By becoming an abuser, he no longer is the victim. I'm not saying this could be subconscious, not necessarily, but becoming what you were subject to can now you can disassociate with that sense of being the victim. By now, you're becoming the abuser, and that creates that cycle. Right? So obviously, the way we have to address this is, what tools can there be for a person to not feel like a victim, yet not have to become an abuser to have that feeling? So let's deal right now specifically with abuse that occurs through emotional or physical, but not necessarily sexual. Other types of abuse, but not sexual, because I think sexual abuse might have different strategies. What the Torah is teaching us as follows, is that the only way a person, I don't say the only way, the one way, because we're going to see there might be other ways, but one tool that a person can utilize that he doesn't want to feel victimized, and yet he wants to move on with life not feeling a victim, is if one can take that experience with him but channel it into something positive. If that experience can now be channeled into something positive, then that itself will allow a person to disassociate with that sense of being a victim. For example, we've been subjected to abuse, slavery, all of these terrible things by the Egyptians. Internalizing that feeling and utilizing now that experience and being sensitive to letting slaves, emancipating slaves, we've now channeled that negative experience into something positive. Once we've been able to channel the positive, then a person doesn't have to feel like I'm a victim and I'm a nebuch, because I've done something positive with my life, even based on, because suppressing doesn't work. Right? We know you can't suppress. Suppress creates all kinds of problems later on in life. But channeling into using that experience to a positive one, that ultimately will strengthen and make me more, not make me lesser, because of what my experience was. Right? And therefore, that's why, if we went out of Yitzrayim and that experience just made us into potential abusers, then there was no purpose of taking us out of Mitzrayim. God has to take us out of Mitzrayim in a way that is giving us the tools that the Egyptian experience can make us more, not make us less. Mitzvah of Shiluch Havadim is the first mitzvah he gives us. And then subsequently, all the mitzvahs are Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why do we keep Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim? Why do we keep reminding the abuse? No, because it's all being done, channeling it to a positive experience. As long as it's Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim in a positive way, we've taken that negative experience and reframed it into a positive one. We become more. We take control of our experience. One of the ways that an experience controls a person is you can't talk about it. Very often you see the Holocaust survivors refuse to discuss, what's the main mitzvah of Pesach night? Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, to talk about our experience. We're taking control of our experience. Taking control of that experience is empowering us. We're channeling it in a positive. That changes the cycle. Yes, we were abused. Yes, we were victimized. But we don't have to do something negative. We don't have to become abusers. We can take control and channel into a positive way. Makes us more, not makes us less. That could work, by the way, for most abuses. You have to hear how it's going to work with sexual abuse, because you don't want to take that experience with you. It's hard to take that experience with you. That's very hard. So you have to come up with another tool how to deal with a situation of sexual abuse. Now, I'm talking about specifically the cycle of abuse, because there are other issues that are associated with sexual abuse. The fact that a person has lost trust and cannot create a positive relationship anymore, or the fact that a person associates physical intimacy with something negative or embarrassing. I'm not even dealing with that right now. Let's just focus specifically upon the cycle of abuse, that abusers become abusers. What is the tool? So therefore, one answer, and I think it answers the questions we're saying too, is because at the end of the day, the whole purpose of Mitzrayim is to take control of the experience, that now you will know I am Hashem, that is giving you the tools that you are no longer abused in Mitzrayim. That's the answer, but that doesn't help. That experience, taking it with and refrain and channeling into something positive, doesn't necessarily help with the case of sexual abuse specifically, because it's very hard to say that a person is going to take that experience and relive that experience all the time. So how do we do that? So there's another way it can be done, and I think that this helps for all forms of abuse, not just sexual abuse, but I think it has a tremendous message to us living here today. One of the key aspects of a person that has become completely destroyed through sexual abuse is that they don't feel like a person anymore. They feel like they dealt with like as an object. They've been objectified. I am somebody's object. They lose the sense of like humanity. They lose the sense of I've become a thing, not a person. I think one of the most important aspects of changing that, this is a very, very important point here, is the reason we feel, or a person feels that way, having been subjected to any type of sexual abuse, is they feel like an object. That is because they're defining themselves by the perception that the abuser had for them. And think about it for a moment. Why does a person feel like an object? Because that person made them feel like an object. It means that person is looking at me as if I am an object. If I can somehow redefine that I am the one who should control my own definition of who I am, and not let somebody else define for me who I am, that extricates the person from that problem. Because if I don't have to feel like an object, because I know I am a very special person. I have abilities. I have talents. I have sensitivities. I have so much to offer. If I can focus on what I am as opposed to letting somebody else define for me who I am, then that will change that sense of being a victim. Because the feeling of victim is associated with the feeling of being objectified, feeling of being an object. Now that is true by all of the abuses. All of the abuses that it's the perception of that person had for me is what makes me feel bad about myself. If I can change that, if I can reframe that, redefine who I am for myself, so therefore you don't have to go, the first idea is carrying it with you and bringing it with you. That's true, but it doesn't help in situations where bringing it with me is not going to help. The way it helps is focusing on what happened to me is because that's how he perceived who I am, but that's not who I am. This is who I am. That will take away, and that will stop the cycle of abuse, because then I don't need to become an abuser to remove myself from being a victim. All I need to do is redefine for who I am, and then I will not be considered to be a victim. Now, this is huge, by the way, because on some level, all of us continually define ourselves by the perceptions of others instead of looking at who we are ourselves. Right? The whole strength, the indomitable spirit of the Jewish people through the ages was that they refused to allow others to define them. I am a Jew. My commitment is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I have my sense of being, of reality. Torah gives me the values. I don't need to look to others to define my values. That's even to the point where they used to change the names of cities that they lived in the most anti-Semitic places they lived. They refused to call the cities they lived in by the names that the anti-Semitic population called it, because they said, we create, the reality of ourselves is created by us. We don't let other people create reality for us. That's why people were so strong about don't use the Gentile dating systems, meaning the 2000, whatever. You have to use we define our time, our being, our reality. It's all defined by us because we create our own perception. That's been the success of the Jews through the history. I think now more than ever, the last century, we've stopped doing that. We start looking to society to define ourselves. On the liberal end, to be accepted by liberals, look at the way we have to redefine our moral values to be accepted by on that end. But it doesn't stop there, because on the other side, on the right, we're allowing communal pressure to decide how we should dress, where we should send our kids to school, where we should daven, instead of stepping back and saying, what is the right thing for me? We're allowing pressures outside of us to define who we are. The Vilna Gaon says the word Yisrael comes from the word Yashar. He said what Yashar is, a person's an Adam Yashar, is that he does not look outside of himself to define what the right thing to do is. He himself is upright. He defines for himself the right thing to do. That's what the strength of Yisrael is. So it says, we can't point fingers. Oh, look, they're succumbing to external wills and whims of society. No, we're doing the same thing. We ourselves are defining ourselves no longer by what's good for this kid, what's good for that kid, what's good for me, what's good for... We're letting the pressures around us make that decision for us.
What about going to someone for advice?
You need, that's, Dagabelev ish yashichena, it says that if a person has concerns, you have to discuss it with somebody, because that's how very often the solution to something comes just by speaking it out with somebody. But it's not allowing, it resonates. You know when somebody's telling you something that's really the right thing. Sometimes it requires somebody to let you know that, but it's real. It means everyone needs advice, everyone needs direction. But to say that we're doing that in many of the decisions. 99% of the time we're making decisions not because we went to some Adam Gadol and asked. And very often I've heard where we do that, we still don't listen to what the person is telling us to do. But going back to what we're saying over here is that the strongest tool that we can have is if we're not continue the cycle of abuse in terms of not removing ourselves from that victimhood in terms of in case of specifically sexual abuse, not seeing ourselves as a victim anymore, but this applies by all aspects, is redefining for ourselves who we are based on us and not what anybody else is defining ourselves as. That is a continuous struggle that we go through, but God has given us the tools for that. Where's the tool that allows us to understand reality, to understand what is really, truly good for us, to understand that's the Torah. Because Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, the first thing he gives us the handbook. The handbook that we should not fall to that cycle. That we should be able to feel good about who we are without having to step on anybody else. That's Hamotzi Eschem. That means every time we learn and we do what we are now extricating ourselves from that negative experience. The flip side is if a person doesn't have those tools and doesn't work on the reality, then he doesn't have the capacity. Then he is deep down still an abused victim, and his decisions will be made, and not healthy ones, into doing things that will not be good for him necessarily, but temporarily trying to disassociate himself from the feelings that he has, and he'll have negative feelings as well. Yes?
Rabbi, I have a question about the slavery part. So we were told to put blood of a lamb on the doorpost, and then later release a slave by doing blood on a doorpost.
There's a mitzvah later on in the Torah, not then. There's a separate mitzvah that happened many, many years later, that if somebody is a slave that does not want to be emancipated, then you can let him go until Yovel. It's until 50 years up. You can let the person stay by you, and he has to have his ears pierced, because at Har Sinai we heard that we should only be slaves to God, not to anyone else. That's why you put the slave. No blood on the doorpost. You're confusing two different things.
Really? I thought it was... Okay.
No, the sign that we were Jews that wanted to come out of Mitzrayim was made the signs on the doorpost. That was in Egypt. There's another thing about doorposts later on that it's called nirtza, and evet nirtza. You make a hole in a person's ear if he doesn't want to be emancipated.
Do you have to draw blood?
No, nothing to do with blood. I'm just putting the... Okay, it's heavy, but something to think about.
Thank you so much.